As usual, I'm going to start with a short review of what we covered last time. And mention also that, once again, this is going to be a long video. We're going to cover a lot of material. It's going to go well over an hour. Just how much more than that, I don't know. I would suspect at least an hour and a half. The old activities for week 8, you might recall we discussed moral virtue, considered in its essence as a habit, a mean related to emotions and actions. Aristotle and St. Thomas talked about signs of moral virtue, especially pleasure, and how to become virtuous through the practice of contrary habit. Regarding the new activities, this is focusing on Book 3 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle talks about intrinsic principles of moral activity other than habits and related matters. Chiefly, he talks about voluntariness and involuntariness associated to moral virtue, as well as choice and willing. This lesson repeats some things St. Thomas has already said in his Summa Theologia about voluntary and involuntary action, but he goes into more detail here in the Nicomachean Ethics, which makes it a very rich text, not only with respect to these issues, but many others that will be especially helpful for anybody who's working in practical, productive activity, business, politics, military operations, and so on. He starts lesson 1, St. Thomas does, of the Nicomachean Ethics, his commentary, by doing 3 things. By noting that because virtue works by means of choice, Aristotle defined virtue as the habit of right choice. Then he continues by stating that Aristotle discusses choice together with voluntary and the willing activities. And third, he claims that voluntary activity is common to all 3. To anything freely done. Choice concerns means related to the end, and willing chiefly concerns the end. Now, in the way he proceeds, the way Aristotle proceeds, one thing crucial to note is that he proceeds chiefly negatively throughout this work. The argument, as he said, resembles a demonstratio quia, or an investigation quia, from effect to cause. This is very revealing about Aristotle's procedure. Shortly after this introduction, St. Thomas states that Aristotle's prior discussion of moral virtue indicates that in matters of actions and emotions that concern ethics, praise is due anyone acting virtuously, blame is due anyone acting viciously. No praise is due virtuous acts involuntarily done, and no blame, but pardon is due vicious acts involuntarily done. So, he's focusing our attention, they are focusing our attention on the effects, on what we first do, how we first come to know, become aware of virtuous activity through praise and blame, reward and punishment, and then reasoning from that to the internal principles that cause that. Sometimes Aristotle says that more than pardon, pity is actually due, and total exoneration for blame for wrong choice. According to St. Thomas, the difference between pardon and pity consists chiefly in this, pardon results from a judgment of reason that involves lessening or totally canceling punishment and blame. Pity results chiefly from an emotion of sadness. The acts of the moral virtues and vices especially merit and are diversified by praise and blame, which are diversified by the voluntary and involuntary. Note again the reasoning by way of remotion, like St. Thomas does in his argument for the existence of God. The external activities we observe, praise and blame, reward and punishment, diversify different kinds of voluntary and involuntary activity. They indicate this diversification to us. Then we look for the principles. Hence, people who want to study moral virtue and vice, he said, need to study voluntary and involuntary acts. And they need to do this first externally from their effects, from observing what we praise and blame about these activities. For this reason, Aristotle very often notes the way we commonly talk about things. And from that reason to the principles in human beings that generate that about which we talk. And people wonder very often why he does that. Well, this is because the natural process of philosophical investigation, where you're dealing first with a knowledge of effects, which is what we deal with for the most part, except, say, in mathematics where we're numbering and we know 1 plus 1 plus 1 and so forth, better than we do the effects. That tends to be the standard process of reasoning. Legislators, especially, he says, should find study of voluntary and involuntary acts fruitful to investigate, so they can decree honors and rewards for law-abiding citizen and punish lawbreakers. According to St. Thomas, because its causes are fewer and easier to understand, Aristotle investigates involuntary activity first. Notice, once again, the negative way of reasoning, starting from the differences to getting to what is the same. The involuntary activity first, its causes being ignorance or violence. Then he investigates the voluntary activity second, its causes being the many. The voluntary, in a way, being the principle of the involuntary, because the involuntary depends upon your possession of a voluntary principle. St. Thomas says Aristotle achieves his explanation of involuntary activity in 3 stages. He divides the involuntary into 2 species, by violence and ignorance, and then he examines the involuntary by violence and the involuntary by ignorance. Since voluntariness is caused by a cognition via sense or reason, involves knowledge, an apparent good and appetites of will and emotion cause cognition of an apparent good. Involuntariness can be caused by exclusion of the appetite or exclusion of cognition, exclusion of the appetite of will or emotion, or cognition by ignorance on the sense level or by reason. Involuntariness caused by violence, he says, consists of 2 species. Physical force, which he calls violent simpliciter, or absolutely speaking, and that done, those acts done out of fear. Violence, or the violent secundum quid, morally forced actions. Strictly speaking, for Aristotle, St. Thomas claims, violent action seeks to neutralize and destroy appetitive participation in a choice and action. It must always be caused by an exterior principle, because the essence of a violent act is that an interior appetite resists it. He claims that not every action caused by an exterior principle is violent to a faculty. A violent activity results from an exterior principle acting contrary to the direction of the appetitive faculty in the way it inclines to move toward its end. Regarding involuntary acts done out of fear, in the Summa Theologiae, you might recall, St. Thomas had talked about these as acts of mixed voluntariness, giving the example of sailors who throw merchandise overboard in a shipwreck to save the ship at risk. Aristotle says about such activities that they, like St. Thomas says, St. Thomas taking this from Aristotle basically, that absolutely considered in general, these acts are are involuntary, but at the time they're committed, in the particular circumstance, they're voluntary. The reason for this is that the nature of a choice is fully achieved. It's completed. It's made whole, and therefore, strictly speaking, only exists in the particular. Before that, it does not exist completely, and strictly speaking, doesn't exist at all. In moral activity, the particular act of executing free choice functions as the causal principle of universal relation to acts of intention, deliberation, and consent, all of which constitute parts of the nature of prudence, essential parts. And they precede the choice. What Aristotle calls the ultimate particular, this act chosen, is the one act that these three preceding acts cooperate to generate. And it acts as a universal principle, a principle to which they are universally related, like rowing to a crew. It's a kind of corporate activity in a way. Such a composite act is the act of the whole, the corporate, practical universal that justifies moral activity, like other practical activities, like architecture and engineering, being called scientific. So the fact that, as Aristotle says, science is of the universal. Well, on the practical level, this individual corporate act that is ordering all of the other acts in a universal way toward it serves, even though it's singular, it serves as a universal principle. And so he says that in his Metaphysics, for example, that science, scientific knowledge, includes that of the individual. It has to, because that's where we derive our universal from. And what he's talking about chiefly when talking about a universal is a universal relation. Logicians tend to get this mistaken, and people who teach philosophy in general tend to think that universals are concepts. Strictly speaking, for St. Thomas, no, they're not. Strictly speaking, they're related to judgments and to relations. Previously, I just talked about architecture as an example of being scientific. I've been critical of using something like architecture or engineering as a model for understanding leadership. And the reason for this is not that people who are engaged in engineering do not, beyond mathematics, examine principles like resistance and receptivity, say for the stress of a bridge or for the foundation of a house to support weight, but the way that they study their material and what they are studying does not lend itself to understanding human motivation. It lends itself to understanding external principles that internally relate to these physical forces, not to psychological factors, to try to use those as models, like people in the social sciences do, like snake oil salesmen, to pretend that therefore they're possessed of some sort of science is something that is not fruitful, will incline to do more damage than help to people who are engaged in trying to understand the nature of business activity or political activity or military activity from the standpoint of human behavior and human motivation. So I don't want you to get confused about that. All right. In lesson 2, related to this book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics, St. Thomas and Aristotle discuss what actions merit praise and blame, reward, punishment, honor. Among voluntary actions that merit praise and blame, reward and punishment, and to be honored, and also to be pardoned, Aristotle includes acts of mixed voluntariness because they're done out of fear. Some people are praised for suffering evil They do not deserve, for an evil they do not deserve, including sadness and grief, for the sake of preserving a greater good, a virtue. People who suffer evil to preserve no greater good tend to be criticized. Disordered desire, and those also who act out of disordered desire and prefer lesser to greater goods that are destroyed by the greater evils also tend to be blamed. Some actions done out of fear are done because the evils feared tend to be beyond human endurance, like lying to avoid being burned alive. And such actions deserve pardon, according to Aristotle. Such actions avoid evils of such a magnitude that no magnitude of force should compel their doing. And notice here how the principle of virtual quantity is involved in this, and how this indicates that we take into consideration in praising and blaming, we estimate the powers of the individual and the magnitude of the good or evil that is confronting them. This is part of that estimative sense of cogitative reason that's essential to understand in order to understand practical choices of all kinds. Two difficulties especially exist about evaluating which acts merit praise and blame, reward and punishment, and pardon, all of the things that someone who happens to be a corporate executive or a political leader should know. At times, judging what is to be chosen to avoid evil and to be endured so as not to be deprived of a greater good is difficult. This is a judgment call of reason. It involves prudent judgment, being the referee, because this involves estimations of powers and abilities. Students of St. Thomas often mistakenly name this the moral principle of double effect. It is no such thing. It's the principle that business people talk about regarding cut your losses. If it's not a moral principle considered in and of itself, it's a principle that derives its moral force from prudential judgment in relationship to greater and less evils, and in relationship to multiple evils following upon a choice. So the moral principle is that of prudential judgment, not of double effect. Even more difficult regarding determining praise and blame is to face evils for which you should be praised, is to remain emotionally steadfast in a decision involving mixed voluntariness. Doing so takes some courage, because at times the choice to avoid the evil involves suffering disgraceful indignity, the disgraceful indignity which is something undeserved, and for which a person can be blamed. The choice to endure it deserves praise, according to Aristotle. To sum up about such acts, Aristotle says three things. Absolutely considered, violent acts are acts to which a person contributes nothing as an intrinsic appetitive principle. Their cause is totally extrinsic. There are no secondary causes. This is like the physical world of Sir Isaac Newton, where only God acts, and there are laws imposed on things externally with respect to their behavior. So everything more or less is totally forced. By reason of some, the second thing Aristotle says is, by reason of some circumstance, at some time, they are somewhat voluntary, because in these circumstances the human appetites somewhat consent to choose them. Third, determining the act we should choose in such circumstances is difficult because singular acts present us with many differences and options. Judgment about them cannot involve an exact rule. It has to be left, therefore, to the prudent person. In other words, it's got to be left to the estimative rule, the rule that involves estimation and comparison of abilities of the thing to be done, the act to be chosen, and the abilities of the person who's choosing it. I say the reason for this is because the rule, I say that is because the rule is one involving proportion, comparison of proportions, intensive quantity, possession of power between the nature of the agent and the nature of the act. St. Thomas and Aristotle did not talk about this at this time, but this is these are principles that they're using. People who deny the existence of natures and things cannot make prudent choices because they have no rule or measure to determine free and responsible agency. Without faculty psychology, without the admission of organizational wholes existing independently of human beings that have their own principles of organization, without the notion of part-whole relationships existing within the agent, and causal principles that enable you to author your own acts, there's nothing to praise and blame. Nothing exists for people who maintain such claims, such sophistic understandings of moral behavior that's intrinsically honorable, praiseworthy, or blameworthy. All of these involved, to understand them, involve the notion of estimative sense, faculties, and habits. For 5 reasons, Aristotle rejects a claim made by some philosophers who say that because reason is man's specific difference, only acts performed in agreement with the determination of reason are voluntary. The way he talks suggests he's thinking about some Stoics. When, because of some pleasure, some sort of external good, a person acts contrary to reason. He acts violently. A person who, for example, might act with greed toward pleasurable goods, intemperance. And Aristotle is thinking about this as being an excuse being made by people to exclude themselves from criticism for intemperate behavior. Pleasurable external goods, he says, like riches, simply by being external, supposedly, violently compel man to act against his reason. Aristotle refutes this claim for 5 reasons. If precisely as they are pleasurable and seemingly good, he says, objects of choice cause violence. No human action would be voluntary. All human choice would be violent. Everyone who performs acts as a result of violence acts involuntarily, with sadness. But people who act to acquire something good do so with pleasure, not sadness, and not involuntarily, not by violence. For people to attempt to excuse moral blame for yielding to the pleasure of external goods is ridiculous, he maintains. It denies the power of individual moral freedom. He claims that only what possesses the nature of a universal and perfect good compels human nature to desire it. Choice is always of the apparent and imperfect good. This, of course, creates some problems, which Aristotle would deal with as we go on. For a person to call himself the cause of his virtuous activities, but not the cause of his vicious acts, he maintains, is ridiculous simply because they induce desire. Virtuous and vicious acts are contraries. They are caused by the same principle, in this case, appetitive reason. Such a claim makes a person free only to cause good. Although the principle inclining his will to pursue it and avoid it is external, the principle to consent and choose is internal. So the final decision about moral choice, its determining cause is internal, and hence arises moral responsibility. In lesson 3 of book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics, St. Thomas discusses what Aristotle says about the involuntary resulting from ignorance, having just talked about it resulting from appetite or from violence. As St. Thomas did in the Summa Theologia, Aristotle distinguishes 3 kinds of moral ignorance: voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary. All such acts get their names by being related to the will in different ways, he maintains. Involuntary acts of ignorance are acts of ignorance the will opposes as unknown. Non-voluntary acts of ignorance are acts of ignorance as unknown, but not necessarily unwilled. Voluntary acts of ignorance are will-caused acts of known ignorance, willful ignorance, engaged in to excuse a person from moral responsibility in general. Involuntary acts of ignorance, Aristotle says, sadden a person. After the fact, the person inclines to change them and repents having committed them. He claims further that these acts of ignorance differ from each other. Acting out of ignorance is one in which ignorance partly causes or generates the act. Acting in ignorance is one in which ignorance is conjoined to the activity by vice. An angry person acts in ignorance in a way, and so does an intemperate person, because they act out of anger and intemperance, and in some way act unknowingly about the personal damage the action does or might cause. The ignorance happens simultaneously with the act, as conjoined to it, but not as causing it. Similarly, every vicious person acts partly in ignorance of the real good at this moment, the good he or she should do, or the evil that should be avoided. The good she thinks he should do or not do. And that's the result of the possession of the vice. By repeatedly acting in ignorance of real good to be done, the angry and intemperate person increasingly become like the voluntarily wicked person. They increasingly become unjust toward others, increasingly wicked in themselves, increasingly act voluntarily. They increasingly lose touch with reality, and they increasingly lose a knowledge of real good and real evil, for which they are morally responsible. Or we are, assuming that we do them. In addition to voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary acts, Aristotle adds involuntary, voluntary, and non-voluntary ignorance. He adds negligent ignorance as a kind of voluntary ignorance. This is a kind of ignorance of what a person ought to know in the individual circumstance. St. Thomas also calls it a privative ignorance. It's the sort of ignorance we do not expect of professionals, of physicians, for example, not to know how to heal, or of airline pilots not to know how to fly an airplane. It involves ignorance of what is, especially of what is suitable under the circumstances. In 2 ways, Aristotle claims a person can be ignorant of what is suitable, what's proportionate under the circumstance, in particular choice and general choice. For example, in particular choice, whether to fornicate now, or in general, whether to fornicate ever. He says, a person can be ignorant through a kind of voluntary ignorance. A person can be also ignorant of the individual or the singular conditions, the circumstances under which an act is executed, and this is an involuntary kind of activity. This brings Aristotle to the point of discussing the circumstances of an act, which he maintains enter into the nature of the act, because the act which is being constructed is a singular act, and all of these are essential elements to its formation, to the constitution of its form. Who is doing the action? He lists 6 different points, circumstances of an act. Who's the chief agent? The proximate cause. What is that person doing? Generically, in general, what kind of an act is it? Is it health related? Is it sex related, for example? With whom or what are you engaging in this activity? In what time or place are you doing this? With the help of what? And for what end? And in what way? Aristotle claims only a totally insane person is ignorant of all of these circumstances. But ignorance of one of these or more of them diminishes or increases moral responsibility. According to, and praise and blame, reward and punishment. After considering all of these elements related to the commission of voluntary, involuntary, non-voluntary actions, Aristotle goes into a definition of voluntariness. He defines the cause called voluntary, once again, starting negatively, because it's through negation that we start to become aware of specific differences. Differences are kinds of negation. We pursue them, we focus attention on them to come to an understanding of how to put a multitude into a genus and how to take a generic action and specify it to give a precise definition. So he looks at the causes of involuntary action to come up with the specific difference of voluntariness. One, he says, is violence, physical compulsion, which he's also already talked about. The other is ignorance. Since physical compulsion and ignorance cause involuntary acts, the voluntary act appears to be what the agent causes. Violence is thus excluded from voluntary activity, and the person causes such acts in a specific way such that the agent knows the individual circumstances that concur with the act. So ignorance is excluded. Voluntary acts require knowledge of circumstances. And since moral activity is voluntary, to be ignorant of the circumstances affects the nature of an action being voluntary. For 5 reasons, next, Aristotle rejects the claim that not everything an agent originates through knowledge of circumstances is voluntary, because sometimes the emotions, not the will, chiefly cause a human act. His chief reason is that an action is voluntary because the agent causes it, according to the agent's natural inclination to act. It's not because the will is the proximate cause. The emotions can be the chief cause, of voluntary acts, especially when they have the natural inclination to take direction, to listen, to reason, but refuse to do so. Especially when voluntarily a person has chosen not to educate the emotions. If this were the case, if voluntariness only involved the direct engagement of the will and knowledge of all of the circumstances. He says the young children and non-rational animals could not perform voluntary acts, and strictly speaking, they don't. Aristotle is extending the notion that animals don't have wills, and the wills of the children are underdeveloped. But the point that he's making is that what he's calling voluntary actions have an internal principle of authorship, so that they are internally caused, and they are caused with cognition and with consent, at least of appetitive consent. And so, in a way, this can be extended to the actions of non-voluntary agents. And so, in a way, you can say that their actions are voluntary, but certainly not one which includes moral responsibility. If evil actions done because of anger and intemperance are involuntary, so should be the good actions caused by emotion. But Aristotle says, since human will is the chief cause of morally good and evil acts, emotionally influenced human actions cannot come to be an act without consent of the will. This is the point he's trying to drive home. Just because we're acting out of emotion, that this is chiefly causing what we're doing, doesn't mean that our actions are involuntary. That doesn't mean that voluntariness is excluded from our actions. And that's why he brings in the example of the children, the animals, other animals. And at times reason incites emotion to seek goods we should seek and evils we should avoid. These are voluntary acts. Being emotional does not exclude them from being voluntary. We don't necessarily have to be involved in deliberation for an action to be voluntary. So long as we've had the opportunity to educate ourselves about these principles of action, that's enough for Aristotle. And I think according to prudential judgment. He repeats that sadness accompanies actions we do involuntarily, though violence, pleasure accompanies actions we do voluntarily with emotion. We tend to condemn voluntary moral mistakes and not to condemn involuntary actions, whether successful or failures. Just as we condemn voluntary acts that should be avoided when done after deliberation, we condemn vicious actions committed as the result of anger or another emotion. That is, we tend to do this. The reason for this is that by means of the will we can resist emotionally caused evil acts, even those done in anger. Acts done out of anger generally are identical with acts done out of deliberation. And since acts done out of deliberation can be voluntary, so are acts done out of anger. Since the human emotions are inclined to obey reason, actions that proceed from them are voluntary. We have the opportunity to educate ourselves, and in the majority of cases, this education is not difficult to do. We have many opportunities on a daily basis to do this. After examining voluntary and involuntary activity, Aristotle next examines the nature of choice. St. Thomas considers this in Lesson 5. Among other reasons, he does this because he says that choice appears especially proper to virtue, which is a chief concern for ethics. While the habit of virtue generates inner choice and outer action, we chiefly judge virtue and vice by inner choice. Good reason exists to use inner choice as the measure of virtue and vice, he adds, because sometimes out of fear a vicious person performs virtuous acts. In several ways, Aristotle proves that choice is a species in the genus of voluntary activity. Like all genera, voluntariness is universally predicated of choice, he says. While every choice is voluntary, in two ways he proves not every voluntary action is a choice. We've already gone over this. Children and irrational animals, for example, do things, suffer things voluntarily. Because both lack the ability to deliberate, neither uses choice as part of voluntary actions. What we cause through a cognitive appetite, appetitive principle within us, without resistance, with receptivity, Aristotle maintains we do voluntarily, even without deliberation. So he's extending the meaning of the term voluntary to those circumstances and conditions, and to those principles. On the basis of the fact that to be identical, no difference or opposition can exist between two things, Aristotle claims that choice cannot be identical with sensual desire or any emotion, such as pleasure or anger, pleasure of the concupiscible appetite or anger of the irascible. Choice can't be identical with sensual desire, deliberation, which is an act of reason, wishing, which is an act of will, or opinion, which is also an act of reason. Choice combines these elements of reason and emotion and willing. He observes that all four acts contain all the principles of human cognition that are used in making a choice. Some people have been, and because of this, some people have been inclined to reduce choice to one or more of them or a combination. But he refutes this claim that choice consists in a sensual desire or emotion, because anger and concupiscence exists in brutes. Choice, which requires deliberation, abstract consideration, absent emotional involvement, does not. While the incontinent man acts from sensual desire but not rightly reasoned choice, the continent man acts from right choice and contrary to sensual desire. Sensual desires, he adds, are contrary to choice in the continent and incontinent persons. The continent person chooses according to reason what the incontinent person chooses by concupiscence and contrary to reason, but they both freely choose them. Sensual desire opposes choice in the continent person and agrees with choice in the incontinent person. Pleasure or sorrow follow every emotion. Choice can happen without any emotional result, with emotional indifference by reason alone, as is the case in the abstract choice and consideration of scientists, people we call scientists. That choice and anger are not identical is easier to prove because, according to Aristotle, anger tends to shut down deliberation and inclines to generate sudden actions, impulse. Angry people tend to be impulsive. They don't incline to wait for perfect direction of reason. Concupiscence, however, acts less suddenly and more closely resembles choice because it can involve more calculating deliberation. A choice cannot be identical with wishing, according to Aristotle, because both are acts of will. Both are acts of will. Choice essentially involves a voluntary act ordered to a means. Wishing relates to any and all good, to an end, and a means. Choice is essentially related to generating action, doing something external, which precludes the impossible. Wishing can be directed toward the impossible. Wishing can be concerned with an action someone else causes or doesn't cause. You don't want to be caused. Choosing only relates to what a person estimates he or she can do. Notice the connection between choosing and estimative sense. All the above differences chiefly refer to the fact that choice is directed toward acts within our power to cause. All indicate its essential connection to the estimative power, cogitative reason, and why this is where we have to locate prudence. In lesson 6, after showing choice is not concupiscence, anger, or wishing, it's not appetitive, Aristotle shows that choice is not opinion, either in general or particular, although some people might confuse it with opinion. He says it can't be considered in general, because opinion can be about everything, impossible things, things lying in our power, outside our power, eternal things. Choice only concerns actions within our power. We have to think about this when we are making choices. And since choice is essential to moral activity, every time we make a moral choice, we are engaging in our estimative sense. What is divided by different contraries, Aristotle adds, cannot be the same. But opinion is chiefly generated by the knowing faculty having contraries of true and false. Choice is chiefly divided by the appetitive faculty in relationship to the contraries of good and bad. For 5 reasons, he says, opinion is not identical with choice, because we are judged good and bad according to our actions, not according to our opinions, basically. The goodwill, not natural or acquired ability, causes a person to will natural or acquired natural acquired goods. I'm sorry. A goodwill, not natural or acquired ability, causes a person to use well natural or acquired ability. Hence, Aristotle says a habit is a quality by which a person acts when he wishes. A good will causes a man to act well according to every capability, according to a habit obedient to reason. And Aristotle adds, we call a person good, morally good, good absolutely, simply for having a good will. From the fact that he has a good intellect, we call a person relatively good. Chiefly, the will causes choice, and the intellect causes opinion. Choice chiefly is about actions, not things. Opinion, Aristotle says, is chiefly about things, not actions, because our actions are contingent and quickly passing. Knowledge, opinion about actions is not sought for truth, not chiefly. It's sought chiefly for purpose of action, which is good and evil. The good of choice consists in rightness of the appetitive faculty ordering an action toward an end. It has to involve some sort of thinking about and relationship to prudence. When Aristotle says we praise choice because it chooses what he ought, he means we praise choice because it chooses what it ought. It chooses the real good, the real means. It chooses in the right way. It chooses prudentially. We praise opinion for being true about something. We praise choice for rightly directing action, for being prudent. The perfection of opinion is truth. Right judgment of choice is right direction of our action. Because things have different perfections, according to Aristotle, they are different. And this is the case with opinion and choice. They have different perfections. Therefore, they have to be different. Choice is accompanied by certainty, moreover, because we choose especially what we know to be good, what we know we like more, relative to us. We we are certain, through choice, because we conclude our deliberation. We've made a decision. We've done so on the basis of knowing ourselves in some way and what we want. Opinion is accompanied by uncertainty because we have opinions about things about which we admit our knowledge might be false. Opinion is accompanied by fear. It includes a conviction about some weakness in our personal abilities, in our knowledge. If opinion and choice were identical, people who make the best choices, who have true opinions about the best choices, would be identical. But the contrary is true. Sometimes, because they have a bad will, people who have the right opinion about a better choice of action knowingly, willingly choose the worse action. We human beings don't want to admit this because we don't want to admit that some human beings knowingly could will to have bad wills. And therefore, we can excuse ourselves from being included among that category. Not being concupiscence, anger, wishing, or opinion, Aristotle, in fact, once again, removing all those as possibilities, reasoning negatively from effect to cause. Aristotle he's found a specific difference and defines choice in terms of its genus as voluntary. Not every voluntary act is deliberately intended, though. And the specific difference is that it is deliberately intended. Counsel, therefore, has to precede choice as an act of reason. Now, after determining the difference between choice and opinion, in Lesson 7, St. Thomas takes up what Aristotle considers about counsel, which in nature precedes choice. Once again, he's getting back. Notice how he's moving back to the principle, from taking that which occurs more evident to our senses first, to getting at that. Aristotle starts this process by determining counsel's formal object, whether we should take counsel about matters about which the many, fools, for example, and the insane, or the prudent and the wise take counsel and deliberate. Negatively, reasoning through a process of discovery, quia, not propter quid, he considers the matters about which we don't take counsel. We don't take counsel about things that do not change, eternal things, unimportant matters, necessary things, things that can exist in only one way, chance events, things that cannot be affected by our forethought or action, everything, things about which we tend to have no control. Next, Aristotle says 4 species of causes can generate, or 4 species of qualities can generate things. He's not talking about the 4 causes here. He's talking about cause in a more general sense. And one of these is nature, the other is necessity, the third is fortune, and the fourth is human intellect. Taking a look at these 4 different principles that in general can cause, he says nature, necessity, and fortune are irrelevant to counsel. The human intellect, however, is not. This is different in all human beings, not generically, but in degree of power and ability, in the perfection of this principle. Each human being takes counsel about practical matters doable by him or her. Next, Aristotle notes how counsel happens in human acts like grammar, where it rarely happens to people who know grammar because the method of proceeding tends to be universally known and fixed among the people who possess this habit. The reason for this is because we only deliberate about doubtful matters, matters about which some doubts can exist, contingent events. In doubtful matters, we say we deliberate about our abilities and other matters that can affect performance. We deliberate, in other words, about being able to get the job done. We deliberate more about some doubtful matters than others, and matters more crucial to performance, to action. For example, the medical doctor deliberates about a person's health or strength. The business person deliberates about supply and demand, needs and wants, and times that can limit our abilities to act. The sailor deliberates about weather. The athletic coach deliberates about other matters, such as the strength and weakness of the team, the opposing team, of the players, the circumstances and conditions under which an event is going to be held, and so on. Now, all of these points we're going to discuss from here on out are crucial to understanding the nature of organizational activity related to corporations, to businesses, to political activity, to production, to manufacturing, any kind of practical activity, art, and science, that involve deliberation. All this deliberation relates in some way to intensive quantity greatness, the quality of powers, and to estimative sensation. To be able to know arbitrariness, and to be able to take it into account, and to know our abilities. Aristotle notes that when we tend to deliberate, we do so more in arts that are practical and productive, in arts and in practical and productive sciences. In arts involving knowledge about how to put something together, and less in speculative and observational sciences about how something is put together. Then he says that the things about which we take counsel involve essentially three qualities that relate to the matters of counsel. Their time, the things that happen more frequently. We tend to deliberate about things that happen frequently, not things that happen rarely. About things that have an unsettled nature. There's a kind of arbitrariness about them. There's no fixed rule about how to handle them. And about their crucial importance. These tend to produce fear in people who have to get things done. Things that happen frequently of an unsettled nature that are of crucial importance all suggest dangerous types of activities, or difficult activities. In lesson 8 of this book 3 commentary, St. Thomas discusses the method and order of taking counsel. Today we would call these the steps involved in counsel, or in getting the job done. Among other things, St. Thomas starts lesson 8 by defining counsel as a practical deliberation about things to be done, saying that just as in speculative science, where we assume principles from which we seek, where we reason to conclusions, so in practical investigations we assume ends and seek reason to means. To clarify his claim, he gives 4 examples of people who take counsel and what they do not do, once again reasoning negatively to get to the specific difference. The medical doctor does not deliberate about whether to heal the patients, not a professional one. The orator does not deliberate about whether he should persuade people. The statesman does not deliberate about whether he ought to achieve peace, at least if he's an honest statesman, a real statesman, not a hack politician, as so many of these people tend to be. No one engaged in practical action deliberates about whether to pursue an end of that practical action. In practical matters, the end is the first principle, the chief mover. Taking for granted that the last act is a first principle of practical investigation, St. Thomas notes 3 points about the order and method, the steps to take in an investigation. 1, how, by what motion or action can we attain the end? We do this through asking ourselves questions. The first question is, how, by what motion or action can we attain the end. What means what means must we use to execute this motion and action? When can we attain an end using, when we can attain an end using several actions or instruments, we ask, by which of these can we better get the goal? Can we more easily achieve it? This is the question of method of discovery. If only one means exists to achieve the end, only one action or instrument, we must persevere and use care. Excuse me, it's a little long lecture. If this means should not be at hand, we investigate how we can get it so we can arrive at our end. The first act in intention, St. Thomas notes, is the last act in execution, the last in the order of discovery, the last thing we find out. Just like, that's what we want to discover. Just like in geometry, practical investigations proceed analytically, break down holes into parts, reduce conclusions to first principle. Counsel is a kind of inquiry or process of analysis, of discovery, that seeks to get to a first principle of operation, because the last in analysis is the first in production and activity. What do we want to produce first? What's the first action that we want to do, and how do we go about doing it? As a prime example of the analytical reason related to counsel, St. Thomas talks about how business people think and how hope of success tends to guide their reasoning from start to finish. He says, in point of deliberation, where they have to execute a first action, if they find this is impossible, they immediately give up. For example, if they don't have the money. If they find the action doable, they immediately start. If after starting they discover they need the help of others, they count the number of friends they have with the right qualifications to help. They go to friends because they go to people they can trust. If in addition to friends they find they need tools, they ask, how can we get these tools? Who and where is the supplier? Do we know how to use them? And if we do not know how to use them, can we get help from others who do? If so, where are these people? How do we get the help? St. Thomas says, to put what he says in modern language, supplementing it with what he said about good counsel and prudence a bit, the way the business person tends to proceed is by asking these questions in this order. So too would the sound politician as well as military leader, as well as coaches of different sorts. Certainly this is part of executive coaching. Is this action something we need to do? Do we need to do it now? Are we able to do it? If not, do we know someone we can trust who can do it for us? If we're able to do it, can we do it easily without outside help or resources? If we need outside resources, what friends with the right qualifications can we find to supply these resources? What are the best resources available? Do these include people and tools? If so, where can we get these? Are they readily, easily available to us? How quickly can we get them? Once we get them, will we need special training to use them? If so, do we have the internal resources, money available to secure these? If not, should we try to secure financing to do so? Finally, Aristotle determines the intensive quantum limits of counsel to involve three generic or general considerations. Every individual takes counsel about actions doable by him or her toward an end. A limit exists in the number of means counsel can consider. It cannot be of the infinite. An inquiry about means must be limited to the means essential to the activity at hand. We don't start to discourse about things essentially unrelated to the job at hand. Finally, Aristotle engages in a comparison between counsel and choice. Even though he's examined counsel after choice for two reasons, Aristotle says counsel precedes it. Counsel inquires about possible means to choose. Choice ends that inquiry, that deliberation. That's why it's certain. And starts the process of prioritizing if several means exist. For example, he says that the ancient Greeks considered kings to be guides, counselors, people who gave them counsel, to the people whose vote determined the choice. They weren't like so many contemporary benevolent despots and oligarchs posing as democratic rulers. Aristotle concludes his comparison of choice and counsel by defining choice in a general way without giving detailed explanation. He says choice is a desire arising by means of counsel for things in our power. He says it's a deliberating desire inasmuch as through counsel a man arrives at a judgment regarding the things that he had discovered by means of counsel. And that ends part 1 of this video lecture. We have been discussing a lot about the voluntary and involuntary activity, and also about temperance and intemperance, and opinion, and a whole bunch of activities related to voluntariness. We're going to continue talking about voluntariness in a way related to the will as a faculty, the faculty of willing, or voluntas. And this begins with St. Thomas's commentary, lesson 10 on book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Regarding the will as a faculty, St. Thomas says that regarding any faculty, we name the activities of the faculty from the faculty in relation to that toward which it chiefly and of itself tends. That is, an end that activates it. So regarding willing, he says that disagreement exists about whether the act's formal object is a real or apparent good. What stimulates it? What activates it? The end toward which it moves chiefly. Those who regard real good as the formal object, as its external stimulus of willing, claim that a person who wills real good as a formal object doesn't will when choosing badly and acquiring a real evil. In fact, Aristotle, in opposition to this, maintains that the will wills something that sometimes is not a real good. He refutes those who say the formal object of the will that is, as a faculty, is the apparent good by stating their claim asserts no generic object, external stimulus, is identical for the faculty of will in all human beings. This is to him analogous to saying that apparent, not real color, is the formal or natural object of sight, its external stimulus. Hence, just as the faculty of sight would have nothing visible if it only had an apparently visible a subject that stimulated it, the faculty of will would have nothing naturally lovable as its formal object if this were an apparent and not a real good. The claim is false because every natural faculty has some determinate formal object, some definite external mover, as St. Thomas and Aristotle say. Everything which moves is moved by another, by some sort of an external agency that activates the power to move. Vicious people follow. Aristotle resolves this disagreement by saying, for really good, prudent, for the really good, the prudent man, the real good and the apparent good coincide. They're identical. What really pleases, what apparently pleases, is what's really good, and it's what really pleases. For the vicious person, these are not identical. Right estimation of real good is a right estimation of virtual quantity goodness relative to the agent that is a unique quality and virtue of the prudent man. I'm putting that in my own terms to sum up Aristotle's position. The prudent man rightly judges things relative to human activity, in each case judging what is really good, because things appear to each facultative habit according to the condition, the quality, the intensive quantity, greatness of the habit, just as they do to a healthy organ. This is a great analogy for the point that Aristotle is making. Just as the person with a healthy organ is the measure of healthy body temperature, so the prudent man is the measure of real good in the individual situation. Hence, the prudent man rightly judges about individual means that lead to really good ends in the individual circumstance. Vicious people follow badly educated cogitative reason, the estimative sense, and the concupiscible appetite, and so they are not good measures of the right means that lead to a really good end and fulfill a real need. Having discussed the voluntary activity, choice, and counsel, these conditions of prudential judgment as principles of human acts, Aristotle now discusses virtue as a principle of human activity, and he focuses on temperance and courage. But more strictly speaking, I think we could say he focuses on hope and fear in general. The emotions behind these virtues and the virtues and vices. These are very important, once again, for people engaged in practical activity, because the chief motivating factors for doing things that in any way require an art, which involves difficulty, production, manufacturing, business activity of all sorts, political activities, military activity, is doing something that, first of all, relates to likes and dislikes, loves and hatreds, that involves hope and fear as chief motivating factors. And nobody in the history in Western intellectual history, and as far as I know globally, has done a more intense and thorough examination of the human emotions, and these three emotions especially, than St. Thomas Aquinas. Nothing compares to it as far as I've been able to discover. And I've looked to find these things over the several decades. Aristotle starts this discussion of virtues and vices that are within our power by demonstrating that virtue must be in our power because the formal object of virtue consists in means to an end. It relates to our choice, and means are possibilities, not impossibilities. Moral virtue and vice are the products of choice, of what we are able to do. The power to act and not to act well or badly, belong to the same faculty, the voluntary. Affirmation and negation, receptivity and resistance belong to the same genus. In operation, if the operation is within us, so is the habit, which is the principle, Aristotle says. Next, he refutes the claim made by some that no person is voluntarily, willingly evil or unwillingly good, because the will by nature tends toward good, and all human beings seek the good. This is the claim that he's refuting. No one seriously doubts, he says, that a man is the cause of his actions as a father is a principle of children. If counsel, choice, willing are principles of our action, then we are principles of our good and bad actions. Because the principle of good and bad actions is in our power, the principles are in our power, the actions are also in our power. He also says that how private individuals behave in their everyday lives supports his claim. For example, fathers punish children and servants and reward so they punish them for misbehaving and for vices, and they reward them for virtuous activity. Lawmakers, legislators act analogously, enacting punishments and of different severity and sentences, and honors and rewards to encourage virtue and restrain vice. Because encouragement before doing an act is useless regarding impossible acts, no one tends to encourage people to do things not in their power, not in our power. Like we are not encouraged not to get hot in the summer when we have no means available not to become hot, or to do actions that are not voluntary. He uses arguments related to ignorance to prove that virtue and vice are within our power. While ignorance, he says, causes an act to be involuntary, it does not do so when ignorance is willed to excuse moral responsibility. Also not excused is ignorance of right behavior due to negligence in right education, a vice that leads to loss of ability to reason well, similar to alcoholism or drug addiction. To be noted is that restraint and encouragement relate to our acts, to acts within our power. Estimative reason serves senses, that is, what is and is not within our power. This faculty that we have, that we share with other animals, enables us to estimate our powers and ability in the individual circumstances. In lesson 12, St. Thomas talks about the refutation of the roots of the false opinion that no one is ever voluntarily evil. He starts to refute this claim by addressing a false claim that not everyone is naturally able to be diligent about acquiring good habits of soul. By nature, some people have negligent dispositions that prevent them from developing virtuous habits. By nature, some people take pleasure in pursuing and doing evil. In reply to this false claim, St. Thomas states that a human being can be of a natural disposition in two ways, physically and psychologically. Physically influenced by bodily qualities, today we'd say body chemistry, environment, and emotions. Psychologically, chiefly determined by intellect and will. Body chemistry and environment influence human choice by influencing human emotions, and can have no more persuasive power over the intellect than do the emotions and such faculties which incline by nature to take direction from reason. Regarding influence of habits of the soul on voluntariness, Aristotle says blameworthy bodily and psychological effects are voluntary. We know this, among other reasons, because we are censured on account of them by ourselves and by others. For example, he doesn't mention these, but I'm sure he's thinking about these based on what he said previously. Conscience, shame, and embarrassment. We restrain ourselves. We blame ourselves through these natural reactions on the part of our psyche. Moral habits are voluntary with respect to formation, he adds, and not easily voluntary after formation. Evil habits differ as evil actions do in two ways. They withdraw us from doing good. In this case, we cause our own evil lives, our own misery, because we are not diligent in doing good. We live carelessly and make little or no attempt to do good works. Evil habits incline us to do evil to ourselves through incontinence and intemperance, and to others, inasmuch as by our own volition we are unjust toward others. Habit formation is natural to human beings. Through it, we perfect or weaken facultative operations, we strengthen or weaken them. Evident is that good or bad operations cause good and bad facultative habits. Aristotle makes the same point about habit formation by relating an act to a habit as its proximate cause, saying that if we will some cause from which we know a particular effect results, strictly speaking, at least implicitly, we will the effect, at least indirectly. We will that it exists more than we do choosing to refrain from this action, which generates it. While the effect is not voluntarily willed in and of itself directly, it's willed as necessarily related to and conjoined with this action. To will to do unjust and intemperate actions, but not to will to become unjust and intemperate, is irrational according to practical and speculative reason. He maintains. He continues that once formed evil habits are not easily reversible by acts of will. He gives the example of a once healthy person who, through bad habits of diet and exercise, becomes sickly. The principle under which we become just and incontinent lies within our power. Once executed, that principle cannot quickly and easily repair subsequent damage. Hence, we reproach people for their vices, but he says not for their health defects. In Lesson 13, St. Thomas discusses Aristotle's refutation of the opinion that we have no knowing faculty that knows the good. And this, once again, is going to focus on the estimative faculty, the estimative sense. St. Thomas says, Aristotle starts to refute the claim by maintaining as a fundamental principle that as natural desire or inclination follows the form naturally generating it, so animal desire follows perceived form. And in the animal perception is toward animal needs. There's no distinction between real needs and apparent wants, between apparent pleasures and real needs or real pleasures. Only human beings begin to be able to make this distinction because they're not acting strictly by instinct. To be desired by any animal, the subject must be perceived as good. Instinctually, the animal is perceiving that as fulfilling a real need. As a result, some people might claim we have no power over the way things appear to us because our imagination can cause them to appear to us other than they are. In reply, St. Thomas says that in two ways a thing can appear good to someone. In general, by a kind of speculative consideration and by practical knowledge, by reason of comparison of what is to be done. In the first way of appearing good, the judgment about good follows no particular natural inclination. It follows consideration of reason, syllogizing about actions, some of which might be good or bad. In the second way of appearing good, a subject may appear good in two ways. Absolutely and of itself as a natural need, a good in conformity with the nature of an end, and not absolutely, but judged by the present consideration. In other words, all human beings have a natural desire to avoid death, to avoid starvation, to avoid dehydration, to be able to breathe. Very rarely, are we wrong about these conditions? Are we mistaken about the fact that we're sick, or we can't breathe, or we've experienced something that's near death? So absolutely considered in itself, there is this kind of knowledge by natural inclination of the appetite toward what is stimulating, much like the sense faculty of sight reacts to the external stimulation by color. The appetitive faculty inclines toward an object in two ways. By emotion, under emotional influence, we judge something good as it appears to us in the present situation. For example, the ship is sinking. We estimate it to be sinking. We want to throw goods overboard. And by habit, by which we judge a thing really good or bad in light of practical experience related to this sense awareness that we have through the estimation of cogitative reason for naturally real difficulties and dangers, sense goods and sense evils. That sensation is of the real, according to St. Thomas, and it can't be mistaken under most circumstances and conditions any more than we can be mistaken about the fact that we are seeing something, that color is stimulating our sight, or sound is stimulating our ears. If we trust our sense of sight and sense of smell, and if our emotion of hope and our emotion of fear are not irrational, and these emotions are located in the irascible appetite, which is located in the estimative sense, then we sense real goods and real evils, and we cannot be mistaken about that. To deny that is to affirm that the experience of fear and hope is irrational. That is, I think, irrefutable, an irrefutable claim. For those who disagree with me, please show me where I'm wrong. The imaginative reaction we have to a moral habit is caused by the habit, the condition of the habit. One in touch with reality will represent reality correctly. And remember that the imagination is not something that is revealing to us the nature of sense good and sense evil. This is in cogitative reason that functions in relationship to memory. And from the standpoint of memory, it's impossible to misremember a state, a situation. That's not to have any memory at all. If you remember, you are recalling in conformity with the way things are. To remember falsely is not to remember at all, as far as I can see. In reply, the sophists might claim that some people are born with the ability to see the real good and take delight in what is really good for us, and others are not. This ability is not teachable, nor is self-control over the imagination that supposedly can be taught. Aristotle and St. Thomas maintain that all human beings have this ability to delight in what is really good for us. All of us have the ability to apprehend the real good and to take delight in what fulfills real needs. For both virtuous and vicious men, women, the goal is innate to the faculty, no matter how much it is misperceived. Once again, being wrong about being hungry or the inability to breathe is not something that normal people experience. He adds that if virtues are voluntary, because we cause the habits by which we incline to move toward our innate ends, so too are the vices. Lesson 14 now gets us into courage and fortitude, or courage or fortitude, and talking about hope and fear more. Having finished his treatise considering the nature of virtue in general, Aristotle next considers particular virtues, starting with the virtue of the irascible appetite, courage, which is regulated by hope, and also to some extent by fear. Before considering virtues related to external goods in Book 4, he considers virtues related to protecting and preserving human life, which are chiefly courage and temperance. Even though temperance is a virtue of the concupiscible appetite, nonetheless, it has a natural inclination to preserve human life. This is important to understand, to see how it's naturally inclined to take direction from prudential reason, which is located in cogitative or reason, or the estimative sense. Starting with courage, Aristotle defines it in general as a firmness of soul, that is, at least according to St. Thomas, as a firmness of soul by which the soul remains unmoved by fear of danger. It's a kind of mean between fear and rashness. He should have said between cowardice and rashness. Strictly speaking, for Aristotle, the formal object of courage is not all species of fear. It's one species of fear especially, the fear of death. This is interesting to note how he relates temperance to the generation of life, and courage to the fear of death. That the love of life is the chief motivating principle for all of the different principles of the human appetites. Through several examples, Aristotle shows how the formal object of courage is not all species of fear. Some species of fear are good to experience, he says, to lead a good life. Fear of loss of reputation and honor, for example. A person who does not fear evils of this sort, Aristotle calls disgraceful and shameless. Fear of poverty, sickness, unavoidable evils, except a person's own wickedness, might cause these species of fear. Fear of personal evils like envy and injury to himself, his family, and being whipped are the other examples he gives. He claims that the person who remains calm in the face of the most terrifying dangers is brave beyond qualification. The courageous person does not lose the ability to reason well when confronted by terrifying dangers while fighting for a noble cause. Instead, this person remains calm. He says further that courage consists in prudential hope, in a specific kind of death, honorable death for a good cause in battle. What he's talking about evidently is this virtue being the maximum in the faculty, in the genus of courage, as a kind of military courage. Regarding the act of fear and its relationship to courage, he says that fear's formal object and courage's is in some way greater in degree or kind in magnitude than the person who fears. That is the act of fear. Is greater than the person who fears or who has the courage. The brave man experiences fear the way a prudent man does, especially regarding matters of circumstance. He endures things he ought to endure, flees through fear the things he ought to fear, with the right motivation, in the right way, at the right time, and under all of the other circumstances in the appropriate way. The chief reason for that is that every moral virtue accords with prudence, which is right reason about things to be done. So once again, the formal object of fear and of courage is an intensive quantity, which, considered in itself, thought of abstractly, is greater than the person who has the fear. You have to have some sort of a sense of your own weakness in confronting it. He adds that the proximate and proper end of every habit is to impress a likeness of the habit on its act. This is the way causes by nature tend to work. In this way, habits and custom act like second natures. The chief end of every naturally operating agent is a perfect good, the good of the universe, but its proximate end is to imprint a likeness of itself in another. Hence Aristotle says that the good which the brave man intends is not the habit of courage, which already exists in him or her. It's the likeness of this habit in the act. He next defines the acts of cowards as contrary opposites of courage, and he goes into detail regarding this that I'm not going to consider, because knowing what courage is by nature, you can figure those out on your own, or just check them out if you like. Instead, we're going on to lesson 16, where St. Thomas describes Aristotle's discussion of arts of civic and military courage, the chief kind of courage. In 5 ways, Aristotle contrasts real courage with counterfeit courage or counterfeit fortitude. In 3 general ways, he says that an act of courage can fall short of real courage by not operating with knowledge, by being caused by emotion, not choice, and by being motivated by imprudent choice. The first of the 5 ways, the first 3 of the 5 ways deal with what he calls the fortitude or the courage of citizens. The 4th with the fortitude of a soldier, and then the 5th way he compares the courage of the citizen and that of the soldier. Regarding the courage of citizens, he says that this kind of fortitude is one in which citizens undergo dangers to secure honors from the state. So it's, properly speaking, it's not virtue in a complete sense, because it's motivated to get something from the state, not just love of doing the right thing as considered as such. In the second way, civic fortitude is engaged in by citizens to face dangers to avoid legal penalties. In a third way, it involves a situation in which leaders compel citizens in an individual situation to fight, and say not to run because the state is being attacked. Because no one fears to do what he knows to do well. When he discusses the virtue of the fortitude of a well-trained soldier, he says in many ways this is counterfeit. He says that in war, many ways exist to be unarmed, and well-trained soldiers fight like the armed against the unarmed, until they face a formidable and unfamiliar danger. Well-trained soldiers who lack real courage tend to maintain this counterfeit courage. They fight so long as they do not see real danger that exceeds what they estimate to be their skill. When confronting, say, large numbers of the enemy, and they realize that they're unprepared for a particular battle, then what they'll do is they'll tend to cut and run. Soldiers with counterfeit courage, he says, expose themselves to dangers because from the start they estimate themselves to be more powerful, better trained, and better armed. When they encounter an enemy they estimate more powerful than they are, they run fearing death more than dishonor and shame. Unlike them, those who possess the courage of a citizen in such a situation will face death rather than dishonor, and this tends to be at times due to a lack of knowledge on their part rather than also a kind of counterfeit courage. He continues his discussion of counterfeit courage in relationship to hope and to anger. Once again, all of these emotions are very important to understanding behavior within organizations, because within organizations where you're dealing with lots of dangers, you will also find this kind of behavior that needs the right qualities to deal with it. This is one of the reasons why people in major international corporations very often want to hire people who are well trained in military virtue. Besides the kinds of wrongly motivated courage just considered, Aristotle examines the counterfeit courage motivated by anger. While the angry man inclines to attack danger and to resemble the courageous, the strength of soul, the virtual quality that motivates the truly courageous is the love of the good, not anger. The courage, the counterfeit courage of the angry man resembles that of an enraged animal, he says, but the fortitude of the angry man closely resembles real courage in that it's motivated by justice, which is a real good. After counterfeit courage motivated by anger, he examines bravery motivated by hope. And he says that you find this in people with little experience. St. Thomas had talked about this before, about young people, the elderly, and alcoholics being people with great hopes. And people with little experience tend to have high hopes because they tend to overestimate their powers. In contrast to those who overestimate their powers, there are people who also tend to underestimate their powers, and also tend to experience hopefulness. By habit, not spontaneous emotion, especially in situations of extreme and unexpected terror in which no emotion is so vehement to preclude the use of reason, with calm, without the need to deliberate, the really courageous person is able to make prudent choices. Aristotle considers the last kind of false bravery, which resembles that of the inexperienced overconfidence, the one I just mentioned. People who underestimate the magnitude of dangers that they face instead of overestimating their abilities. Such people are more lacking in courage than people with high hopes, because people with high hopes rightly estimate the dangers, they just overestimate their abilities. Companies do this, organizations do this all the time, overestimate, underestimate our powers and abilities. Such people tend to fight longer than do people who underestimate dangers, who tend immediately to flee once they rightly estimate the real danger they face. This distinction, by the way, that we make between real and apparent dangers is not something we could make if we weren't aware of and convinced of the fact that real dangers exist. If real dangers, once again, don't exist, there's nothing to fear and nothing to hope for if no real goods exist. Those emotions are irrational. In Lesson 18, St. Thomas continues dealing with some properties of courage related this time to pleasure and pain, because all of these are related to prudent judgment and the nature of the estimative sense to preserve and protect individual and species life. According to Aristotle, while courage relates to fear and daring, it does so differently. Praise of this virtue consists chiefly in being in the fact that the courageous person is undisturbed, is calm in the face of terrifying events. It doesn't consist chiefly in doing something daring. It's because the person stands up to a stronger person in more difficult situation than in facing an equal or a weaker one. A man's estimate that a person he attacks is not too powerful to defeat is the origin of daring. But it's not really that for which the person is praised for courage. Then he discusses a special relationship of pain to courage. Fear and pain, he says, share a generic object, evil. Pain, presently affecting or actual evil, and fear, future or possible evil. The brave man stands fast against the future dangers and continues steadfastly in the midst of these dangers. We praise the courageous person for stout-heartedly enduring painful and harmful things, immediately threatening things. We praise virtue especially for the same reason. A person endures distressing things, endures pains and harm. This is more difficult than abstaining from pleasure. Hence, we don't tend to praise a person for abstaining from pleasure. Courage is more praiseworthy, therefore, according to Aristotle and St. Thomas, than temperance. Next, Aristotle talks about a special relationship between courage and pleasure. Since courage exists in enduring distressing events, the brave appear to take some greater pleasure in attaining the end. This is something odd Aristotle notices about this special relationship to pleasure of the courageous person. This pleasure appears to be feebly felt at the time a person is experiencing present grief. There's a certain pleasure that comes to the courageous person in facing danger. Boxers, soldiers endure much pain and drudgery to achieve a greater pleasure. The brave man suffers wounds and faces death to attain the good of virtue, which is pleasant, and to avoid disgrace, the pain of disgrace. Noticing this, Aristotle refutes the error of the Stoics who claim that virtuous men feel no pain. Aristotle maintains, on the contrary, that very intense pain befalls the virtuous man. Enduring the pain increases, it doesn't diminish the brave man's courage. For the Stoics, the only human good is virtue, by which they mean totally unemotional reason, which is false. Greater than this, as Aristotle saw it, is the good of human life, the love of living, for example, which we feel as the greatest we experience as the greatest of human goods. He says, human beings are saddened by the loss of any good. Two circumstances can increase this sadness at such a loss: the greatness of the good lost and the injustice of the loss by this or that person. The loss of life by a virtuous human being is of the greatest sadness. This causes that person distress. It also causes distress to people who have become aware of it, which he doesn't know. St. Thomas adds that hope of future life makes this death, however, desirable and diminishes that sense of distress. The brave man willingly suffers the loss of many lesser goods by death, and desires the one greatest good of living virtuously with a certain type of intensive quantum greatness. Next, Aristotle modifies a claim about virtue he had personally made, that virtuous operations are pleasurable regarding courage. He says this is true only of the end, but not of the means. I would modify that, and I would say, since he already has, that the pleasure's there even during the suffering that a person endures. But chiefly, it's in the end, not in the means. He adds that nothing prevents men who are less brave from being good soldiers, like mercenaries. And he finishes his discussion of fortitude or courage with a general definition of it as a virtue consisting in a mean according to right reason, that is prudence, dealing with fear and daring on account of the good. This now takes us to temperance, which has an essential and crucial relationship to moral behavior in general and also to the estimative sense, even though it is present in the concupiscible appetite. After considering courage, which concerns terrifying things, destructive of human life, Aristotle examines temperance, which concerns pleasurable things related to food, sex, and drink, that preserve and protect human life specifically and individually. He says, both agree in being seated in the sensory part of the soul, the sensitive part of the soul, that inclines to listen to reason in being sense appetites. Temperance is located in the concupiscible appetite and concerns pleasures of food, drink, and sex, as I've said. It's common to human beings and to other animals, as is fear of death and love of life. He adds that animal fear of death is a chief reason temperance is located in the sensitive appetite, and that this act of temperance this love of life, and fear of death is in the soul more than simply because they are emotions. They're the formal object of the emotions, sense goods and sense evils for animals. They relate to sense goods and sense evils for animals. Aristotle starts to define temperance generically as a mean concerning pleasures and pains or sorrows. To define it more specifically, he distinguishes two kinds of pleasure. Of the soul completed by interior apprehension alone, and by the body completed in some bodily affection of an that is stimulus of an external sense, or attraction to something that we've externally sensed. As a chief example of psychological pleasure, Aristotle refers to love, the cause and principle of pleasure. And he says that pleasure arises from knowledge that we have, that we possess what we love. No external sense, only the interior power of the soul apprehends love and having. He adds that temperance concerns bodily pleasures, not psychological joys, like honor and learning, which are the concern of virtues. The joy attending honor and learning has no bodily cause. Nor is temperance concerned with other psychological joys, he adds, like storytelling, contingent events, or unnecessary deeds. And vices, he adds, related to these kinds of acts are not named intemperate. It's not concerned with external goods, like money or friends, nor is it essentially concerned with the pleasures of sight, hearing, or smell. Pleasures related to these senses belong only incidentally to other animals. Notice once again how he's using negative types of observations to get at the specific difference of temperance. He says, temperance concerns intense pleasures of touch, chiefly of touch, and also of taste, in so much as they relate to touch. Common to all animals, related to the natural animal inclination to preserve the existence of the genus and species and individual life. He claims that other animals take delight in the sense of sight and hearing and smell only incidentally by reference to taste and touch. And he supports this claim in reference to smell and sound and sight, as I've indicated before with this example, that that animals do not chiefly delight, like a dog, in the scent of the rabbits. They delight in eating them. And lions delight not in the sense, the sound or sight of animals, but of that a meal is near. In pure intellectual delights are not the chief concern for animals not endowed with reason. Animals have sense faculties and appetites solely to assist and instruct in self-preservation individually and of the species. Humans have them for preservation of the individual life and of the species, and to lead additionally to lead to knowledge that is appropriate for reason. Having finished the external sense faculties to which temperance does not chiefly apply, he discusses the two to which it does apply chiefly, to touch and to taste. In the last lesson, St. Thomas had explained how knowledge, having and not having, what we love and what we do not love, is the first principle of all other emotions. It's not simply the awareness of pleasure is not simply an awareness of this sensory experience. It's of having pleasure, having something we like, having something we love. Once we sense that what we think we love, we do not love, we lose that sensation of pleasure. He's also told us that most of all, most intensely by nature, we love having human life. We naturally love having this natural love of having human life causes all facultative loves as natural likenesses of itself within these appetites and within the habits. And this awareness of having this as part of our natural makeup is not something experienced by the common sense or by the external senses. It's something first experienced on the level of the estimative sense or cogitative reason. This is my claim. And I think it's verified in the fact that St. Thomas says this is where we sense real goods and real evils, and in the examples he gives of, like the sheep running away from the wolf as a natural enemy. And also with respect to how sense memory works, which is located in the estimative sense. So no exterior sense generates knowledge of having and love. Previously, Aristotle had also noted that the sense of touch, as St. Thomas did also, knows the sense of touch generates all other sense faculties and is the most loved by all animals for preserving life. That's why education of the sense of touch is so crucial for living a virtuous life, a happy life. Regarding taste, Aristotle says that this is not the chief interest of intemperate people. Intemperate people care little about perfectly discerning distinct tastes and flavors. They tend to be more interested chiefly in gorging themselves, in gluttonous experience. Their chief interest is in eating, drinking, and sex. Today we'd also add drugs to that, all of which occur through touch. Intemperance is has little interest in taste, just as taste, but only to the extent that it somehow enhances touch. The pleasure of which of touch is enhanced by taste makes it attractive. So taste has touch related to eating and drinking and sex and self-preservation of life as its formal object. He gives the example of this person called Philoxenus Ericius, who wanted a throat long as a crane so food could remain in it for a long time so he could have the sense of touching it. Because all animals share touch, of all the vices, he says, Aristotle says, Intemperance appears to be the most beastly, the least properly belonging to the human, to a human being. Hence he says such vices possess the most disgusting shamefulness, make human beings most like brutes, and I would add small-souled, because that's what he's getting at. His entire ethic is a movement away from being small-souled to being great-souled, through acts of virtue, like Plato talks about in Book 7 of the Republic, of turning the soul around toward the good. Through their performance, that is, of intemperate activities, human beings, he claims, become notoriously evil and blameworthy for this. In reply to the objection that aside from bestial pleasure, some properly human delight and good should pertain to touch, Aristotle says pleasures of touch, appropriate for humans, used according to reason, prudentially, like that of an athletic massage, related to the health of the body, considered as a whole, are good. But disordered, intemperate pleasure tends to subordinate the health of the body, considered as a whole, to some parts of bodily delight in relationship to this or that bodily part. To explain, in other words, so we subordinate the health of the body, the organic health of the body, to the pleasure of a particular organ. To explain the nature of intemperance more precisely, Aristotle distinguishes among several modes of human desire: generic, specific, and individual. He says that by generic and specific nature, all human beings naturally desire to satisfy natural needs for goods like food and drink, which all animals must satisfy to stay alive and healthy. Natural need is not identical with individual preference for this or that kind, taste, or amount of food or drink. He adds that in genuine and specific desire, most human beings do not make mistakes in eating or drinking about too much or too little food, or what we really need to be healthy. Most of us don't make these kinds of mistakes. Natural desire is only that the natural need be supplies. It doesn't tell us about, in the individual situation, how to apply that, or in the individual circumstance. That's why we need virtue. Just like natural law needs the assistance of civil law for the individual case. Aristotle's chief point is that intemperance unnaturally subordinates the natural need of the preservation and protection of individual life and species survival to satisfaction of the sense of touch of a couple of bodily organs. It resembles sacrificing healthy sight for the pleasure of touch in the organ of sight. He says belly-mad people, gluttons, are very brutish because they fill their bellies with no sense of limits. Intemperance, like all vices, does not conform to the prudent measure in the individual circumstance. The prudent measure is the right measure as determined by the circumstances that complete the act of choice. Hence, intemperate people take pleasure in things that they should not eat or drink to preserve and promote their health. They take pleasure in excess degree in what they eat or drink. In eating and drinking, they drink the wrong way, at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong people, and so on. Hence, he concludes that intemperate people enjoy objects highly unsuitable, blameworthy by nature, and they ought not to enjoy by nature. And even when they enjoy real goods, they tend to do so in the wrong way, by excess. This brings us to the discussion in Lesson 21 of how sorrows, pleasures, and desires affect temperate and courageous people. Regarding sorrow, St. Thomas says, the temperate and intemperate are differently disposed. The temperate person is not chiefly praised for enduring sorrows. He's chiefly praised for the way he endures them, nobly and honorably. The coward, not the intemperate person, is blamed for refusing to undergo pains. The intemperate man is blamed for the way he undergoes sorrow and pain, constantly whining about it. There again, that's my addition. Unlike the coward, the intemperate man's grief is not generated by real harm. It's caused by discomfort. It's a kind of infantile reaction. Once again, my observation. The temperate man is praised for not complaining over the absence of pleasures and comforts, as distinguishing the temperate person from the intemperate. Courage chiefly concerns pains and sorrows that follow from the presence of something really harmful that caused death and bad health. Temperance chiefly concerns pleasures that follow from the presence of pleasurable things. According to Aristotle, pleasure is essentially a cause of sadness, and this is a remarkable claim. For the intemperate man, because he does not want some pleasurable things, he wants them all, the whole genus, in the most intense degree. The desires of the intemperate person are insatiable, as are the desires of an intemperate population. Once again, my addition. Sensual desire, not prudence, drives his emotion to choose pleasurable things. Hence, when he does not get what he covets, he desires pleasurable things more than anything decent, careful, useful, honorable, or really good. While St. Thomas says pleasure is the cause of sadness, being the cause of sadness might appear incongruous to some people, still, pleasure distresses the intemperate man, agitates it. Like a pilot of the ship distresses people who don't know how to sail. Aristotle adds that the vice of insensibility, in contrast to intemperance, being incapable of experiencing pleasure, or less than we should, for our health and well-being, is rare. It's contrary to animal and human nature. It's a kind, and because other animals differentiate food by virtue of the pleasures it gives, and hence it appears to be common to all animals. A person who takes pleasure in nothing appears to be less than human. We would call them puritanical, Jansenistic, if people are still aware of Jansenism. Next, Aristotle details how the temperate man should behave toward pleasures, saying, the temperate man follows the golden mean of prudence regarding pleasure, sorrow, and desire, doesn't delight in shameful things that delight in temperate people, is saddened by these, tends not to rejoice in things he should not, real evils, and to rejoice in what he should, real goods, in satisfying real needs, is not excessive in any circumstance, saddened beyond measure, if at all, is not saddened beyond measure, if at all, by absence of pleasurable things, doesn't long for absent pleasures, or longs for them in the right measure, when he should, in accord with prudence. Accordingly, the temperate man, St. Thomas says, desires all pleasures useful to bodily health and well-being, all pleasures prudently, all other unnecessary pleasures, wants, under three conditions. That they, one, do not hinder health and well-being, like excess, or at least neutrally healthy food and drink. They are not contrary to sexual decency, like fornication, or imprudently excessive. They don't exceed a person's ability to possess, like pursuing delights like impossible dreams, going financially broke in the process. In contrast, Aristotle concludes in contrast, Aristotle concludes the intemperate man, the man wrongly disposed to pleasures, pursues pleasures harmful to health and well-being, contrary to what is honorable, greater goods, getting the real goods, getting things that are really needed, and that exceed his or her personal means. In lesson 21, which is the next to last lesson we're considering, and Aristotle compares intemperance to vices of cowards and children, so that he can complete the discussion of the vice of intemperance. To make the comparison, he talks about how each vice involves a different kind of voluntariness. He says intemperance is more voluntary by nature than cowardice and fear, for two reasons. We delight in what we do voluntarily, at least if it's good. He doesn't mention that, but that's understood. And we are saddened by what we do involuntarily. The intemperate man, he says, moves toward the pleasure he wants. The coward flees the pain he fears. Pain is contrary to the appetite and will. Something involuntary and naturally repugnant causes a coward to flee. Something voluntary and naturally repugnant attracts the intemperate person, because something naturally contrary and harmful causes pain. Pain immobilizes us and corrupts us, tends to corrupt the nature of its possessor. Hence, pain tends to impede intellectual work. As a result, St. Thomas says regarding voluntary acts, good merits praise, evil merits blame, and as does evil more easily avoidable. The vice of intemperance is more disgraceful than cowardice. Since the contrary habit can enable us to avoid every contrary vice, becoming habituated to good actions as a matter of temperance is easy, because many opportunities exist almost every day in human life to practice temperance in eating, drinking, and sex. Because such actions tend to involve no danger, no risk, no great risk, unlike the acts of courage, in which war, first of all, happens rarely and involves real dangers. Makes the vice of the coward much more comprehensible and understandable. Regarding fear, he says that pain causes fear. The pain which causes fear is involuntary and external. It voluntarily tends to be the norm in the face of fear. That is, when we first confront a situation, we walk into it not knowing the amount, and so we walk in with a sense of fear, but not overwhelmed by it. It's kind of abstract. And so it's voluntary when we face it, but involuntary, in the particular situation when we start to understand the magnitude. Intemperance, in the pursuit of intense pleasure, he says, it tends to be involuntary in the abstract. No one wants to be intemperate. Yet, in this individual situation, especially without the virtue of temperance, it tends to be the norm in the individual. The pleasure that causes intemperance is voluntary. As St. Thomas explains, as the soul approaches toward the particular, vehemence increases. The effect on intemperance is to make it more voluntary. The effect on cowardice is to make it less voluntary. He adds that dwelling on particulars related to intemperate activity is exceedingly dangerous, because as we do so, we increase the enticement of the will. After talking about the voluntary and the involuntary related to cowardice and intemperance, Aristotle considers how the vice of intemperance resembles the vice of children, that they especially live under the influence of sensual desire. The need to exist to restrain and chastise children lest they fail to develop prudent habits is crucial The desire for pleasure tends to be insatiable and tends to resemble childishness and foolishness. The less intemperate we are, the more efficient we become in our ability to reason, and hence restraining intemperance is crucial for becoming prudent and remaining in touch with reality, which is my addition to this last bit of advice given by Aristotle to us, to which I refer in Book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Sorry that this was so long, but I hope you found it as enriching and beneficial as I did. Thank you very much.